You talk about
Yeah.
long duration. I've done 13 transatlantic missions in between Hornets and Vipers in my career. It's just a long time at high altitude. You're fatigued just because of the environment you're exposed to. I don't care if you eat properly and bring Gatorade and the coffee and
Right.
you eat along the way. It's just incredibly fatiguing along the way. And oh, by the way, the Viper's the most comfortable cockpit out there, better than a Hornet, better than an F-35. None of that is fun. None of that is fun. At the end, you crawl out of those jets. My longest time in a fighter is 13 hours, and you can barely move when you get out of that because you're just pinned in there. There's nowhere to go, and all of that. And so we're talking about you better drink properly. You need to eat, and you talk about water bottles. I used to take a Perrier. I was known for it. I had a plastic Perrier bottle with me whenever I flew, and I've had them pinned in the back of the cockpit because it went flying in the middle of the test mission, stuck back there, and someone had to go fish it out at the end of a sortie. But always hydrating along the way. And there's and we've used piddle packs historically. But years ago, people went out to solve that problem, and the system that started in the United States military that people know, fighter pilots have heard about, is called an Aircrew Mission Extender Device, AMXD, and then there was a second generation called AMXD Max, and now there's a third generation of this system. It's called Skydrate, and it was intended to uh, be an automatic system that automatically pumped urine away from the body and deposited it into a bag. And so let's do a little show and tell for the viewers,
Yeah.
and then I'll explain the male and female versions of that and how it works. So I'm a hockey player, so think of a cup that a baseball catcher would wear, or every hockey player knows what it is. So a male would wear a cup. Obviously, our human anatomy goes inside the cup, and then the real interesting part of the technology is that the hose that it connects to, that this cup connects to, in here are sensors, and it senses the saline content of the urine. So not water, but the salt content of the urine. It senses that, and then it automatically pumps through a hose to with a pump system, and deposits it into a bag that, as it pumps air and urine, but these little holes here, these little vents, let the air out, not the liquid. And so I'll put all this together while we're talking. Cup has a connection to a hose, which then connects to a um, a bag, which then connects to a pump system. I know I'm making this harder than it sounds. And in the
Is
end, you and I are going to wear this in a pair of boxer shorts. Here you go, where the cup is going to
okay.
fit in there. And we're going to walk to the jet with the hose connected, but not the bag. We're going to tuck it in our flight suit. And then when we
Okay.
strap in, we're going to strap it in, and this bag is probably going to sit on the right side, either in our pocket of our G suit, or out in a helmet bag, or in the console. And it operates by a switch that, if you needed to, you hear the noise,
Yeah.
it'll pump if you need it to, or it'll automatically sense the urine that it is detected. Now, because we spent 20 years or 30 years flying, you and I will never trust that a system will work the first time out. We're
Right.
not gonna let ourselves pee ourselves in a cockpit and have to land. So we're going to probably use that button to manually start the system, and then pee, and then see that it collects in the bag. And when it stops sensing urine, then it stops pumping. That automatic pump stops working. And and if we do it manually, then we control it, and then at some point we start to believe, and we start to trust. And so all of a sudden, I'm not unstrapping anymore. I'm flying the jet. I'm doing the real mission. And I start to believe that when I need to relieve myself in an 8-hour sortie, I don't have to safe the seat, unstrap from my F-35 seat, or even in my Viper seat. open a poopy suit or open the zipper of my flight suit, pee, then push everything back in, zip up, strap back in, arm the seat. 5 minutes of no one flying the jet. We don't have to do that anymore. This is the third generation of this system called Skydrate, and
Okay.
and it's been improved. So we fighter pilots said, look, I don't trust that your pump goes fast enough. You need to treat me like a third year college student who was out beer drinking all night, and then assume that I'm going to pee as much as when we were in college, drinking beer as third years, a lot. I need you to convince me that, so make your pump move fast enough or quick enough to pump out that at that rate, and then give me a collection bag that I can throw away that carries all the capacity I need, so I don't have to replace it mid mission, and will take the capacity of how much I'm going to probably pee, and make it comfortable enough that it doesn't bug me after 4 hours of the jet or 8 hours in the jet. And this is the
Right.
third generation of the system. um, Inputs like, I want a switch that you and I don't have to fumble with in the dark, I don't know, on our right side in the cockpit at night. I want
Yeah.
to feel it and know that it's a activated switch that makes sense to me. And all of those inputs have been made from the feedback from fighter pilots from the first and second generation into this third generation of system. So that's the male part of that. Let me show you the female system, because the hardest nut to crack was for the women. So they were in diapers, or there are stories of women trying to use piddle packs. All of those they are inevitably failure stories in that, or just the hugely embarrassing story of women fighter pilots that we know landing and having to look at their ground crew going, "Hey, I peed in the seat," and then walking into ops or the ready room, and the huge embarrassment of that, right? Nobody
Yeah.
nobody deserves that, and oh, by the way, it clearly would have messed with their head. So here's the solution in the women's side. This is a pad that they would wear underneath them. It has a sticky part of this tape that would fit in the flight suit. It has a detector that I just showed you that sits at the bottom. Depending if you're in a reclined seat, like in a Viper at 30 degrees, that's different than if you're in an F-35 and you're sitting upright. This same pump that I just talked about, I'm not going to run it just yet, but what it does in the beginning is it inflates a pad around the outside to seal the bottom, basically between the legs and the buttocks of the women, so to create a seal that won't leak.
Yep.
And then they can pee, and that same detector will detect the urine and and pull it all away from them. And then when it's all over, it'll deflate on them, and there'll be no leakage to that. And not all women are the same size, so there's 6 different sizes of these, and there's 2 different types.
Okay.
One if it's reclined in a Viper, or upright in an F-35, and the rest of the pump and the harnesses and the hoses are the same as I showed you for the males. And it's been tested by uh, over a period of time more than a year ago. A couple dozen women came to the place where this is designed in Burlington, Vermont, and trialed all this to convince everybody that the design worked, and that the switches made sense, and that the pump rates were fast enough. By the way, women pee faster than you and I do, even as third year college beer drinking students, and and so that they were that it fit and worked for them. And so now you have male and female fighter pilots that can go fly long duration sorties, can go fight. They put the system on, and they can go do their mission and not be worried about piddle packs. We're not separating men and women, and most importantly, all of them can hydrate and be ready to go concentrate on the mission instead of being distracted by that. I'll throw one last thing in before we start talking about it. We wear immersion suits, or we wear chembio suits, depending on the environment, right? You've been to
Yeah.
Korea, or think about Misao, anywhere where we're going to have to deal with chembio. There's what's called a through suit connector system. So the hose system comes apart, connects on the inside of our immersion suit or a chembio, and then there's a valve that connects through to the outside, and you connect the hose to the outside. And so now in my immersion suit, I have a seal that is not compromised, that allows me to don this system when I get dressed. put it on. Then when I strap in to the jet, connect the hose and the bag on the outside. And so I can wear this with an immersion suit or chem bio, whatever that environment is, and I still have the same system available for me.
That answered one of my questions, because the immersion suit, or AKA poopy suit, as you'll hear most people say, I always thought, so South Carolina, it might be 40 degrees, it might be 30 degrees on the ramp, or it might be 80 degrees. And you're going to go fly out over the water, and the water temperature is going to be cold. So you have to wear an anti-exposure suit. I always thought, if it's going to happen to me, I'm going to use a piddle pack and then undoubtedly not get the jaws of death completely sealed back up. I'm going to have to punch out. And not only am I going to be like angry from having to wear this poopy suit out on the ramp, just sweating and, uncomfortable in the jet, but then I'm going to have to eject. I'm going to land in the water, and then it's going to fill up through the jaws of death I just barely missed. So now I'm going to die angry and cold.
The jaws of death.
That's how I thought it was going to play out. So, it's, oh man, those things are just terrible. But, obviously you have to have a solution for that. It's interesting. Has this been, it's not quite fielded yet. Who's the manufacturer of Skydrive?
So Omni Defense Technologies, or Omni Medical Systems, two names for it. In Burlington, Vermont, the inventor, the founder, is a civilian pilot, and he encountered this problem when he was a young guy, and he's an entrepreneur, and he came up with this technology, and he's pushed it through in 2 generations. This system, the 3rd gen, let's get into our rant now, has been tested, but not fielded. It's approved for all airplanes in the U.S. inventory except F-35. Only in F-35 could we screw up the bureaucracy of this system. The only difference between so let's go to the rant. You and Vader and Bender love rants, so here's our rant. All the engineering was done on this. It passed every part of this. What's different about this 3rd generation system from the one that was approved before, the one before was called AMXD Max. This 3rd gen system is called Skydrive. The difference is the pump rate goes faster. The hoses are has a better pilot vehicle interface, but that's essentially the only technical differences. It hasn't been cleared for use, but ACC hopefully in the next little bit will approve it to be used, even if they're still waiting for the Joint Program Office to sort it out. It sat on the desk in the JPO in Crystal City, some engineer's desk, for months upon months upon months, waiting for someone to look at this and approve it.
Even at Naval Air Systems Command, NAVAIR at Patuxent River, Maryland, where it's being held up for an electromagnetic interference test related to shipborne use, even though the difference between the last generation and this generation of the system is only the little pump itself, and some changes to the way the hose buttons are. And it's remarkable because in flight test, what we learned a long time ago is we clear by similarity. In big aircraft development, we know if a test one's like the next one, then we can't afford to waste money or time, and we need to get systems to the warfighter. And sure enough, in this particular case, the bureaucracy has just crippled the approval of the system. Now, none of this would matter, really, except that piddle packs are not approved for use in the F-35. A memo came out more than 2 years ago about that, for the reasons that we talked about: unstrapping, safing seat unstrapping, flying with no one operating the jet, and then, strapping back in and arming the seat. And so piddle packs were forbidden. This system was to be used, and here we are, the 3rd generation of the system, not approved because staff officers or bureaucrats are sitting on the approval. When you guys, you three, rant about systems being approved, this is the tiniest of systems, unimportant compared to major weapon systems getting through, developed and approved and tested and fielded. Yet here we are, we can't even get approval for this system and get it out to warfighters. I hear it so often about meeting the warfighter's needs, and this is a perfect case of how that is not true and how we're not getting it to the men and women that need it. I was at the SAFE conference in Mobile, Alabama a couple of weeks ago. It's where life support and survival equipment is demonstrated. And there are lots of briefings on physiological stuff. And these are the people that go there are the physiology experts that are hopefully representing the squadrons and the wings in the Marine Corps and the Navy and the Air Force. I saw one F-35 fighter pilot there of all the hundreds of people that were there. So not a single warfighter in that building. And I knew from what I saw of all the bureaucracy that's stifling getting better, life preservers getting better, helmets getting better, masks, and getting a system like this, I knew that it would be a bloodbath if there were operators and fighter pilots there instead of bureaucrats and staff officers, because we would just go ape screaming at the people who are supposed to staff this work, this stuff, to get it to us on the front lines. And I think this particular example is just so emblematic of how poor our procurement system is ultimately.
So Billy, it sounds like we're going to have you on the bro chat. You can bring some of your senior saltiness to it. But because you've seen it from a much different level than the rest of us, where we're just kind of like griping and moaning. And I equate it to, remember the 406 megahertz beacon that got fielded? And I'm thinking this is like 2010-ish for the Air Force as it really started making its migration. But I remember having an FCIF come out saying, fly with your cell phone, because if you eject, most likely the fastest stateside way you're going to get picked up is utilizing your cell phone, because, oh, by the way, the beacons have a high failure rate and it's not working as planned. Like this seems like something that we should put some effort behind to solve this problem fairly quickly. It's that type stuff that keeps popping up, and I can go down the road with ejection seats, right? It is an
example of Shaw, right? Your example of the Shaw fatality as in ejection seats.
Yeah, to me, it is mind-boggling. When I did the episode on the Shaw seat, there's a lot in that world I don't understand from the procurement side of the house. I made some assumptions, and I did have people chime in who worked in equivalent type systems for contractors, not necessarily ejection seats, but they had the same level of what they would assume scrutiny, that if you're making these very high, technically demanding components that are critical systems, the amount of oversight that goes in and tracking he's like, we know every serial number of every component and where it came through. And there's 2 sets of eyes or 3 sets of eyes that look at each one of these before the guy or gal is putting that widget into component X, Y, or Z. So he's like, I don't buy, and I had 2 or 3 guys that chime in that, I don't buy that you can just not be aware of this or then not know. And I think there's more that's going on behind the scenes right now with that. I
certainly think we need more. This is an example, but like you're talking about, where the operators, the warfighters, the guys at the front need to be more involved and more educated on the development process. And why I say that is I hear often super smart engineers or scientists trying to field something without understanding what the user really needs. And it's the user that would step in and go, you can't do that to us because your failure rate is whatever, or that's not how we operate. And so here, it comes to a bigger story, which is we're so lazy as fighter pilots, as aviators. What we want to do is be on squadron and go fly and get 250 hours a year, get 150 hours a year. We want to go to weapons school. We want to be great aviators. What we don't want to do is take those staff jobs or do those secondary duties that would have us actually focused on things like, being educated on life support equipment and making sure they get fielded better. We have less operators involved. And so we often miss the pointy end view of how something should work or not work. Now, theoretically, that's what the test world does, from developmental tests to operational tests to then ultimately getting to squadrons. But in so many cases, that really we fail to ferret out the issues that we should have. And so we field systems that they don't work for us.